Hey, this is Allie. Just a reminder to visit whenthenightcomesout.com and go to the Support Us page so you can become one of our patrons and we can continue to make these terrifying episodes for you. Thanks and enjoy. There's a moment when the sun disappears, when darkness falls and you're left with just your fears. That's the moment you feel your first pang of doubt. That's the moment when the night comes out. When the Night Comes Out presents Paper Thin. You are about to witness a man whose life is filled with fear. Trapped by his own mind in a small apartment in a big city, perhaps a city near you. He keeps it clean, but he also doesn't leave, and he never meets the neighbors. The problem? He can sure hear them. The walls, you see, are paper thin. And sometimes, just sometimes, you hear things you cannot unhear. This is especially true at that time between awake and dreaming, when the night comes out. You'll probably say that I'm crazy. I know that. I mean, it's hard to deny that there's something wrong inside my brain, you know? How can you not think that when you don't ever want to set foot outside your apartment? Part of it is the way things are now. That was kind of a twisted sentence, so let me try to clear it up. What I mean is, you can have anything and everything delivered right to your apartment or house these days. I didn't make that happen. The world made that happen. I just take advantage of it because the world outside is a horrible place. I saw enough of it when I was younger. What do you think drove me into the apartment in the first place? Plus, I can see enough from my windows. I watch TV, too. I listen to the radio sometimes. Mostly, I listen to the building I live in. I listen to my neighbors. The walls here, you see, are paper thin. Of course, that means I hear everything. I mean, I can hear stuff going on several floors above and below. I can hear the things happening down the hall either way you go. There's very little that does not get transmitted through the walls. I guess everyone here just lives under the understanding you don't talk to each other about what you hear. I don't go out, and I try not to meet the neighbors, so that's easy for me. I know, you want to know what I've heard. Well, yes, you hear a lot of sex. There are a lot of young couples here because the rent is relatively cheap, so this is their starter apartment. You hear the bed springs squeaking and the bedpost pounding on the floor. However, you also get to hear a lot of the moaning and the sighs, and the things the lovers whisper to each other. Some are louder than others, of course. A few years back, we had a woman who was a screamer and did so loud enough that the cops were called a few times. Sometimes, when the couple is just in sync, the breathing and the sighing and all the things come together, merge into one creature. I can almost picture this one creature, an amalgamation of limbs, mouths, standing in the room, breathing heavily. So, yeah, you hear a lot of that, but you also hear all the bad stuff. You hear the couple fighting when they aren't banging. Sometimes you hear the slaps or punches, too. You get to hear the children crying when their parents are really screaming at each other. Sometimes you hear the lonely people crying, too. Once, a woman down the hall was crying so hard. I don't know what it was that had happened, but the weeping was something out of a movie. There I am in the apartment just trying to live, and there are people weeping all around me or doing their things. Sometimes I can just sit there and listen to other people's televisions, music, or radio. See, I like things clean. I mean, really clean. I know, this has become so commonplace that it's almost cliched. And I did tell you that you were probably going to think I was crazy. So yeah, I'm definitely in the Howard Hughes arena here with wanting to be insanely clean. Most of my days I spend working on the websites I build for clients who never meet me, and then cleaning. I mean, I clean the floors, the kitchen, the counters, and the walls. They may be paper thin, but they always seem to be dirty, too. You might want to know why I'm talking to you. You know, you, whomever you are, that might see this little video I'm recording and saving to my laptop. Of course, by the time you see this, there's a good chance I'll be deader than a doornail. I'm jumping ahead, sorry. My brain, well, it doesn't work so well. You see, I've been pretty lucky when it comes to some of my neighbors. First, there's the landlady Joan, who knows about my fear of even stepping into the hallway and delivers my mail right to me and picks up my rent check when I tape it to the door. Second, there was the woman who lived next door to me. Her name was Michelle, and she lived there for a really long time. She was nice, a little older than me, and she and I could actually communicate through the paper-thin walls using short knocks. She would sometimes leave food outside my door, or also help me with mail and packages. The problem is she got a job out of town. She had to move. I will admit I cried like a baby when she packed up and left. She told me, through my door, that she wished she could give me a hug, but knew I wouldn't let her. That was true, but I had never felt such a powerful desire to overcome my fears and hug anyway. In the end, the human mind is just too strong, and I listened to her footsteps fade away like a lost radio signal down the hall. I just leaned against the door and wept. I'm sure others in the building heard me crying. It took a couple of weeks before I had a new neighbor. Each time I heard a real estate person visiting next door, I would listen against the walls or try to get a view of them through the peephole in my door. First, there was a single mother with a small child. I did not want to listen to a baby crying all night, so I did my best to stomp around, clanging dishes. I wanted the mother to know how thin the walls were and how loud the place could be. Was I an asshole? Probably, but I wasn't going to let just anyone take that apartment. I needed peace, and the baby did too. Anyway, the mom decided to keep looking. The next person to show up was what I would call the standard dude bro. I saw him through the peephole, and he had his baseball cap on backwards, wearing a t-shirt a few sizes too small. He had muscles coming out of his ears, so I imagined the sound of him lifting right next to my bedroom. The sound of weights clanking and clanging on top of each other all night long. Or the other nights when he would have parties long into the night with his pals. Perhaps there would be loud sex too, which I had already had enough to deal with on other floors. There wasn't much I could do about this guy. Just banging around in my kitchen wasn't likely to deter him. I did turn on music and made it quite loud, and made sure it was classical music too. I'm sure his house party tunes would drown out the sounds of Beethoven, but I wanted him to picture the snooty, classical music listening next-door neighbor who would probably be the most likely to call the cops on him. Dude bro did not take the apartment. It went like that for a while. Someone would show up to look at the apartment, and if I didn't like the looks of them, I would make noise or play music. I'm sure the real estate people were ready to murder me. Too bad. This was my safe space. This was my domain, and I wasn't going to let just anyone move in. Then came Kathy. I knew her name was Kathy because I heard the real estate lady call her that. She was young, blonde, wide-eyed, and very sweet. Well, I guessed she was sweet because she seemed very nice. In short, she reminded me a lot of Michelle. So, for this one, I was quiet. I was church mouse quiet. I sat in my bedroom, listening to the real estate agent and Kathy talking, not quite understanding the words, but knowing she was asking a lot of questions. The entire time I sat there, praying, hoping no one else would make a lot of noise. I got lucky. No one did. It was just a few weeks later when she moved in. I listened, hoping she was single. It seemed like she was. Her dad was there and her older brother. I tell you, when someone isn't aware of how thin the walls are, they will talk a lot. Just by listening, you can learn so much. That very night, I heard footsteps from her apartment walking up and down the hall. There was a soft scrape against my door. When the footsteps vanished down the hallway, I opened my door and found a small business card-sized piece of paper. She had drawn a sun at the top and introduced herself as Kathy Morris from Ohio, who had just moved to town. I was so touched by that, I nearly cried. I wished I had the gumption to even walk next door to knock on her door. I wanted more than anything to introduce myself. Instead, I kept quiet for a few days, listening to her playing music and singing to herself for a while. I tried to work on building websites for clients, but it was so hard when I found her so fascinating. You see, I am terrified of people, but I am also a standard contradiction. I'm terrified of the world, but still want to be connected. I want to have friends, but the horrific idea of meeting them in person keeps me inside. Yeah, sure, I have some online friends I chat with, but you know what that's like. Sure, some part of it feels real, but it's not the same. The connection I had with Michelle was as close to being in the same place with the person without actually touching. So I listened for a while. I didn't hear any of the other neighbors walk over to her door and knock. She was sweet, from a small town, and was probably used to everyone knowing everybody. Kathy was in for a rude awakening about living in the city. The city is a confusing mess of a place where everyone is crammed together, but you can feel so totally alone. One night, I didn't hear the music. I heard her sitting in her bedroom, sobbing. I sat in my bedroom and felt every moment of her tears. She was alone. I could sense it. You didn't have to be psychic to know that. I was lonely too. So I got up, walked over to the wall of my bedroom, and very softly, gently, knocked on the wall. Just 4 knocks, as soft as I could make them and still be heard. Her sobbing stopped. It felt to me as if my heart stopped, too. Would she think I was knocking to shut her up? I hoped not. I could just barely make out the sound of her shuffling toward the wall. Her voice was barely audible, so I pressed my head against it. Hello? I felt fear shoot through my body. Hello, I replied, nearly kissing my bedroom wall. Hey, no judgment out there. I knew it was clean because I had wiped it down just a few hours before. Am I being too loud? She asked. No, not at all. I just wanted you to know I got your message. I wanted to let you know I was here. I felt like I was stammering. How the hell did I tell her what I was thinking and why I was knocking without sounding like a creep? I just started talking. I told her my name was Daniel. I told her about how 10 years ago, my wife and child were brutally killed when caught in the crossfire of a gang shooting. I told her about how I had moved out of our house, found this apartment, and sealed myself inside. I had been that way for a long time now. Perhaps it was a bit rude, but I also told her about Michelle. Are you my friend, Daniel? She asked. I thought I would be able to make friends really fast here, but the city isn't anything like where I'm from. I smiled and said, Yes, I'll be your friend. And so we became friends. When I got up in the morning, she was usually up too, and I would knock on the wall to say hello. She'd knock back. Before too long, we had our own little code going. I mean, it was to the point that certain knocks would tell me to turn on the TV and watch certain shows. The worst part for me, anyway, was that she worked out of the apartment, and I was there all the time. During the 8 hours or more when she went off and worked at a local cafe, I was very lonely. Somehow, having a friend, but then having that friend go off and do their life was even worse than not having a friend at all. It's hard to explain. You see, losing my family sent me down a spiral. I did drugs and drank a lot. I starved myself to the point where if I turned sideways, you might not see me. It all drove me crazy. I mean this literally. I was diagnosed with a long list of mental illnesses and have been on medication for years. I sometimes lose the thread of reality. I can usually keep it all in check. When I think my mother is sitting in my living room despite having been dead for 10 years, I can push it out of my mind. You learn to cope. However, when the sound of a demon coming out of the elevator at the end of the hall comes storming down and breathes outside my door, it's a little harder to push that away. The times when I was with Kathy, it was easier to know what to push away and what to fear. She was my touchstone to reality. She didn't ask for this responsibility, and given how young she was, it was probably wrong for me to do that, but it was what happened. So when she was gone, even on my meds, it was easier for me to become unmoored from reality and drift away. For example, I became convinced the man across the hall was actually the Zodiac Killer. This was because I watched a documentary about the Zodiac Killer and then started to obsess over the man who lived there. This was the same guy who had lived there the entire time I had and was always nice, and when he made his amazing tasting pizza, would leave a slice for me at the door. Still, he was the right age, and I became convinced he had lived in California at one point, and well, when you lose touch with reality, you can invent any number of reasons for your delusions. I was certain at one point that the woman who lived in the apartment across the way was trying to send me secret messages. When she wasn't doing that, she was reporting back to her handlers at the KGB. The crazy part, beyond just the delusions themselves, was I would tell Kathy about these things. She would listen against the wall and tell me what was real. Then we'd laugh about it, and it felt so good to laugh. Kathy was real. I knew she was real. I had seen her through the peephole and walking out the front door of the apartment. I know what you're probably thinking. You think I'd fallen in love. That's not true. I mean, yes, I love Kathy, but not in the way you're thinking. Not at all. I wished I could have been her father, if anything, or maybe a brother. I wanted to protect her, but I also didn't want her to end up like me. Maybe if I had been braver or more direct about things, I could have warned her about Kyle. I would maybe have seen what was lurking there beneath the surface. Who's Kyle? I'm sure you've already guessed. She met him at the cafe where she worked. She told me this one night while we were watching an old movie on television. By this time, we were not only communicating through the wall, but had exchanged phone numbers and social media platforms so we could talk through our phones. He was tall and blonde. His hair always looked, at least to me, like he had run his hands through it when it was wet and called it a day. He was always well-dressed, but in a weird, haphazard way. For example, he'd wear a blue suit coat and matching slacks, but then the shirt would be unbuttoned at the top and he would wear shoes with no socks. I never saw him wear a tie. I hated him from the first time I watched, via the window, him come pick Kathy up. He drove a fancy car. He didn't get out of the car to come get her, but honked his horn while he sat at the curb. She went out with him several more times over the coming weeks. Once, when they got home quite late and stood outside the apartment making out and talking, I took my phone and got a clear shot of this guy's face. I had a bad feeling about him and wanted to keep his image handy. Of course, it was just a matter of time before she was sleeping with him. I knew this when, the first time, she must have gone to his place because she did not come home from her date that night. Then, unfortunately for my ears, they came home to spend the night at her place. Yeah, I heard it all. I heard all of his whispered love speak and then the sexual commands he gave her. And yes, there was the sex itself. A lot of it. I could only imagine that Kathy was now so smitten, so far gone into Kyle, she forgot how thin the walls were. I sat in my living room with earphones on, watching videos on my computer. I turned them up so loud I had a headache and ringing ears for 2 days afterward. The next day, she wanted to talk and text me all about her date and how great Kyle was. I refrained from telling her how I heard their entire escapade in the bedroom the night before, but also told her to use caution. People in the city hide behind masks, I told her, and something about this guy rubbed me the wrong way. She told me I was being silly, but I was sure there was something wrong. I started doing research. I got things off the ground by doing an image search using the photo I took of Kyle. Unfortunately, although I thought it was pretty clear, Google did not, and nothing came up. Kathy told me his last name, so I searched first and last name. I got his LinkedIn profile and knew he worked for a big investment firm downtown and was filthy stinking rich. He loved fancy cars and traveling all over the world, eating expensive dinners and very expensive clothes. Everything about him set off alarm bells and raised red flags. There were con men all over the world who had similar photos to con young women like Kathy. What did I do next? I turned to the online communities and posted his photo in some of the true crime forums where I like to hang out. Of course, doing that took a few days while the rest of the people did their own searches. I had to wait and wait. I don't do well with waiting. Kathy and Kyle continued their dating. Most of the time she spent the night at his place. I began to get worried she was going to pack up and move. I mean, he lived in some sky-high penthouse, so how could this thin-walled, tiny apartment complex compete with that? There were more nights when he spent the night with her, though, too. I couldn't sleep in my bedroom with all of that noise going on. Her bed was right up against the wall, so the banging was loud enough and hard enough to crack the plaster. Then I started seeing things. Well, I think they were things just in my head, but I wasn't sure then, and I'm still not sure now. But one night, I was watching the news, and there was a report about a woman who had been kidnapped right off the street. Her dead body was found days later. The man who had done it had been seen, however, and they had a sketch. It looked just like Kyle. I was certain. I nearly went into a panic attack. I called my therapist, and she talked me down. I took my meds. The next morning, the story ran again, and the sketch seemed less like Kyle. Not entirely unlike him, though. I didn't know if I should tell Kathy. I wasn't sure. My delusions seemed so real. What if I was having an episode? I said nothing. Then I got some replies from the true crime forum. 5 people got back to me convinced Kyle was a murderer. One said he had killed 2 young girls in Indiana. Another was sure it was a brutal killing of a teen in Chicago. The others placed him in Salt Lake City, New Orleans, and Seattle. In my increasing panic, I became convinced he was responsible for all of them. However, I checked his LinkedIn and other social posts, and he seemed to state he had always lived in the area. The thing about phobias and crazy thoughts is that even when you see evidence against them, you can't stop believing them. My fear and paranoia grew. I started taking photos of Kyle's car and the man himself whenever I could get a clear shot. I had them on my computer. I posted them to the crime boards. I got more people convinced he was the perpetrator of more murders. It seemed Kyle had a face that could be put on anyone and anything. I had just made up my mind to tell Kathy my fears when she talked to me and said she was going to invite Kyle over that night. She knew I could hear them when they were having their dates. I told her not to worry. Of course, I had plans to worry for both of us. I put alerts on my forums. I also had my phone ready to call the police if I heard anything I didn't like. I stayed there and listened the entire night. I told myself to stop. I should sit in my living room and put my headphones on. But I couldn't. I could barely breathe. The night seemed to go on forever. The movie they were watching ended, and the part I really dreaded started. I could hear them kissing, and then more. Things got out of hand fast. I heard him hit her at one point. It was not some friendly spanking sort of thing. It was a hard hit, and Kathy cried out. Then I heard her scream. I began to panic. I started to dial 911 when I heard Kyle let out his own scream. This was followed by a loud thump. He let loose with a string of curses and called Kathy some truly vile names. However, I heard another meaty thump, and Kyle let out a sound that only a man who had just been kicked in his balls would make.
"Get out!"
Kathy screamed at him.
"Get out now!"
Kyle did a lot of moaning, then a lot of pleading, but I heard him wandering around the bedroom. He must have been putting his clothes on. He offered apologies of all kinds, trying to convince Kathy she had wanted to get rough. To her credit, the scared little country mouse had become quite fierce and explained to him as to which circle of hell he could shuffle off to and live. Kyle got angry as she herded him toward the door. I could almost picture it. There he was in his underwear, holding his expensive clothes in arms, while Kathy stood there either entirely or mostly naked. In my mind, she had a knife or some kind of weapon in her hand. He called her more names, threatened her about releasing some photos he had apparently taken. Kathy said she didn't care, and he had better leave and never call her again. Something about her face or the way she said it must have convinced Kyle because he left. I heard Kathy run to the door and lock it behind him. Then she ran back to her bedroom, fell on the bed, and cried. All of this I heard through the walls. I didn't know what to do. If I had been a regular person and not utterly insane, I would have gone over to her door. I would have knocked and held her as she cried. Since I am insane and she was in another apartment, I just walked into my room and gently knocked on the wall. I heard her crying stop, followed by a lot of sniffling. Then Kathy blew her nose. A few moments later, she knocked back on the wall, gently.
"I'm sorry,"
she said against her side of the wall. "No need to be," I replied.
"I was so stupid, and you heard it all. Oh my God."
"You're not stupid, and you handled yourself beautifully. Don't worry, people in this building know how to tune things out. It's part of how we keep living here." She laughed quietly.
"I wish I could just be with you."
I felt a lump in my throat. I was old enough to be her dad. I also had far too many issues. I wished she could have been my daughter, but I don't think that was what she was thinking. I couldn't think of a way to respond, but before I could, she asked an important question.
"Do you think he'll stay away?"
"Yeah, I think the ass-kicking you gave him will make him think more than a few times about coming back." She said she appreciated that. If only it had been true. Oh, Lord, if only it had been true. We got about 3 days of peace. Just 3 days. Enough time to make it to the weekend, and enough time to make us think it might be possible Kyle would leave everyone alone. It was also long enough for me to see more news reports about a possible serial killer roaming the area, and to become convinced Kyle was the guy. I still did not tell Kathy. She was so perky and positive, the last thing I needed to do was implant my paranoia into her brain. Kathy and I stayed up late talking during those 3 days. Usually, we chatted via our computers or phones, but we also spent time talking through the walls. We got close. It was an amazing 3 days. Then Friday night came. I blame myself, of course. I fell asleep on the sofa. Kathy and I had been chatting away on social media when, during a lull, I dozed off. It had been a long 3 days. Work was busy, but since we had been spending late nights chatting, I was edging towards exhaustion. The sound that brought me back to the land of the conscious was a short barking yell from Kathy's place. It was as if she had tried to let loose with a loud, long scream, but was cut off. Then I realized I could hear footsteps next door, and there were a lot more feet than just Kathy. When Kyle snarled and barked an order, I realized what was happening. Tell me, what would you do if you were me? A man lost in paranoia and delusions, afraid to head out of his apartment even into the hallway. Imagine a man who has lost everything, but convinced the world is out to get him at all times. I grabbed my phone and was about to call the cops when I heard Kyle distinctly hit Kathy across the face. I heard her cry out, and there was a very loud thump against the wall. I knew he had hit her so hard she went spinning into the wall we had shared for so long. Then he said something that caused me to forget about the phone.
I'm gonna fucking kill you, bitch.
Not exactly original, but the way he said it, well, you would have had to have been there. I knew he meant it. In my mind, I knew he had a knife. I knew he was the guy I had seen on the TV and who had been talked about on the true crime forums. I did hit the button, but the phone slipped out of my hands. I heard Kyle kick Kathy, heard her gasp. He threatened her again, said he was going to gut her from crotch to chin. No! It took a moment for me to even realize it was me who screamed. I was even more shocked when I made a fist with one hand and pounded it against the wall. The blow so hard it cracked the plaster. The silence which fell was absolute. The building, my apartment, the world around me was always a cacophony of noise. I had been surrounded by it, absorbing it, taking the world in through my ears, but never experiencing it. When I screamed and hit the wall, the world turned off. The only thing was me, Kathy, and the murderous Kyle on the other side of the wall. I stepped back from the wall, plaster caking my hand, dust drifting down to the floor. I heard footsteps on the other side, mixed with the soft sound of Kathy crying. Barely audible was the sound of a hand pressing against the wall. Paper thin, always paper thin. What came next was barely louder than a soft breeze during a summer picnic. So light, the air coming from the speaker would have not moved a lace curtain.
I hear you.
Kyle stepped away from the still whimpering Kathy and began to walk toward the door. I knew he was headed right for me. He moved slowly, as if he knew all about me, and for all I knew, he did. I had no idea what he and Kathy had talked about during their more intimate and private times.
Little pig, let me in.
Every other apartment had to have heard him. No one stepped out of their apartments to say anything. No one had done anything to stop Kathy from being heard either. I had no idea the 911 call on my phone sat in the corner, half hidden under the bed, recording everything. I'm sure Kyle thought that I was defenseless. This is a common belief when people hear about agoraphobia. They assume we cower in our apartments, afraid of everything, perhaps including ourselves. What Kyle did not factor into the equation was the fact I had lost my family. That comes with a built-in anger, too. It was anger I suppressed most of the time, but it was always there. It was like having a burning coal in my stomach at all times. He also did not know just how paranoid I was. Paranoia comes with caution and the desire to create defenses.
Little pig.
Kyle called again, his footsteps closer to my door.
I'll huff and I'll puff and I'll blow your entire fucking life in.
I ran to the kitchen. I reached into the drawer and came out with a very large carving knife. Long, thin, but brutally sharp, it glinted in the light of the kitchen. Just to be sure I had something for each hand, I also grabbed the two-tined carving fork, hardly a samurai sword, but wickedly sharp. Brandishing both, I stood in the middle of my living room, ready for when the wolf came to my door. This time, against my front door.
We can do this the hard way, the loud way, or we can just get this over with. One will hurt a lot, the other will be over with quick.
You're just gonna have to get huffing, I said, hoping I sounded tougher than I felt. So, Kyle did. It sounded as if he took a couple steps back and then hauled off and kicked open the front door. Just like the walls, the door frames were paper thin. My door banged inward, and there was Kyle. I was even more sure now that it was the man I had seen on the news. The same man in those sketches. Blonde hair, chiseled chin. There was a splatter of blood across his chest. I thought of Kathy, and the anger inside of me just exploded. We ran right at each other. I had the carving knife ready to go and swung it from right to left in a large, sweeping arc. At the same time, Kyle slashed with his own knife. It was sharp. I could tell that even as I was moving, and it cut across my forehead, flaying open my skin, sending a stream of blood down into my eyes. But I cut him across his left cheek, and my cut was just a tad deeper. A large flap of his face just unhinged, and blood sprayed into my face. Before he could recover, I brought the fork up and forward. Both tines pierced his stomach, and I shoved harder. Kyle let out a breath into my face, his bleeding face sending more blood into the air. Kyle wrapped his arms around me, and I felt the blade of his knife go into my back, just below my right shoulder. I let my momentum knock Kyle right over, and we both fell back out through the door to the apartment and into the hallway. I was flung over Kyle's body and into the wall across the hall. I screamed for help, but no one came to the door. Kyle, the entire upper portion of his shirt covered in blood, got to his feet. I felt only pain on the right side of my body, and it was very hard to get a good breath. I tried to stand, but everything inside of me betrayed me, sending me to the floor. "Oh, little piggy, you are going to pay," Kyle muttered through his devastated cheek. I tried again, this time at least getting to my knees. Kyle punched me square in the face. I felt the bones in my nose crunch and tasted blood in a rush down my throat. I managed to slash at him with the knife and cut his left arm open. He cried out and staggered back, but the wound was superficial. I lunged, this time catching his left thigh. This was deep, and the blood flowed out of him in a rush, spattering against the floor like a broken faucet. Kyle laughed, but he staggered backwards toward the open door to my apartment. "That was a good one," he said. "Good shot, little piggy. Not by the hair of your chinny chin. He fell into my apartment. As he did so, I got to my feet. I held the carving knife, now coated in his blood, firmly in my right hand. I could barely catch my breath, and the world was turning gray around the edges. Kyle was laughing, chuckling to himself as if this were the most amusing thing that could have happened. Meanwhile, his femoral artery pulsed with his heartbeat, sending out jets of the precious crimson fluid he needed to stay alive. He fell hard to the floor inside the apartment. The knife he held skittered away across the floor. "This is funny. This is so funny." He shook his head. "I should have remembered that the pigs get the drop on the wolf at the end of that story. The shut-in, the man too afraid to even step out of his door, is the one who gets me. All the cops in the city are looking for me. Not to mention other cities and the FBI. I was wheezing. The air just would not enter my lungs properly and get where it needed to go. Tunnel vision was a real thing. The entire world narrowed down to a pinprick. I could just barely make out Kyle, still scuttling across the floor of my living room, spreading his blood all over my meticulously cleaned carpets. He was like a pathetic insect with broken legs, trying to scuttle away from a vengeful child. His eyes looked up at me, already a bit unfocused. When he spoke, his voice got steadily quieter, as if the volume knob on his entire existence were being turned down. You all think you're so much better than me. The fact is, I'm just the mirror of you. I'm what's inside all of you. You're just too afraid to let it out. You all want to hide behind walls, and they're as paper thin as the walls in this fucking place. Look at you, barely able to stand. Hard to breathe, right? Yeah, look what you did here. How are we any different? It was hard for me to speak, but I did my best. I tried to lean down so he could hear me, but nearly fell. I don't murder innocent women. I don't lie to them and then kill them. I am nothing like you. Most people aren't. You're a sad, pathetic, scared little boy. Now, head off onto hell. The fires are waiting for you. I would love to tell you he looked terrified when I said that, but I'm not even sure he heard me. Instead, he coughed once, his eyes glazed over, and he put his head down. The blood jetting from his thigh had slowed to a trickle. Eventually, it stopped, as did his breathing. As for me, I tried to walk back into the hallway, but the world closed in around me. The gray got darker, swallowed me whole, and everything turned black. I fell to the floor right in the doorway. This is where I'm supposed to tell you that everything was great after that. I should tell you that we all lived happily ever after. Well, since I've been telling you this story, you know I survived. However, it was Kathy who found me on the ground, barely breathing. Thankfully, I had 911 listening in via my phone, and they sent over the cops. I was taken to a hospital. Kyle was deader than a doornail, and they soon found out just how many other women he killed. It was a lot. He was a bad dude, and he used the same MO he had with Kathy. Kyle had a knack for finding young women who were lonely or new to town. He jumped from city to city, finding them, dating them, killing them. The cops had to investigate me, though. That meant I could not move back to that apartment. My safety and my haven was gone. Ultimately, it was all self-defense. As for Kathy, she was hospitalized too, but she got lucky. Her wounds were not nearly as severe, and if I can brag for a minute, this was in large part due to my screaming and pounding on the wall. Had I remained silent and frozen in fear, she might not have made it. Kathy and I have grown close. I definitely, at times, feel like my daughter is back. She helped me move into a new place in a new building. I still have trouble leaving, though, but now she comes to visit. She's helping, and I'm hopeful the therapy sessions will work out for me too. I still wake up in cold sweats. Sometimes I swear I hear things in the darkness. I hear sounds next door or footsteps in the hall. Sometimes in the mirror, I still see shadows of the family I lost all those years ago, usually just for a fraction of a second. I still have delusions too, but they're getting better. Mostly, what sometimes keeps me up at night is thinking about what Kyle said to me. I told him he was a liar, but I also know I was capable of watching a man die without so much as flinching. I think about how we keep masks over our faces and walls up inside our minds and around ourselves. We keep the walls up to show one face to the world, while often hiding another behind it. And those walls, well, they are so paper thin. A man condemned by his own hand to live in fear finally realizes that there are actual monsters. However, they are often deep within ourselves. The fact is, we can face them, maybe even defeat them, or leave them bleeding out on our living room floor. But in the end, they always come back. They lurk with glowing eyes and biting teeth when the night comes out. You've been listening to When the Night Comes Out, a weekly horror anthology podcast with stories by Bryan W. Alaspa and narrated and produced by Allie James. Music by Vivek Abhishek. For Bryan's work, visit his website at bryanwalaspa.com or visit amazon.com for his books of fiction and nonfiction. For Allie's work, find her on Facebook at Allie James Projects. Visit whenthenightcomesout.com to learn how to support us on Patreon.